The Kayapo Project, next on Enviro Close-Up. Welcome to Enviro Close-Up. I am Carl Grossman with Dr. Barbara Zimmerman. She is the director of the Kayapo Project of Conservation International. She's lived for many years and studied the Kayapo Indians of Brazil. Welcome, Dr. Zimmerman. Now, you are from Canada, and here you are deeply involved with the Kayapo Indians. I mean, how did that all come about, and why?
Well, when I was very young, a lot younger than I am now, I had a great interest and continue to have a great interest in nature and conservation of nature. And when I was 19 years old, I was a research assistant to a Canadian biologist who was working in the Amazon, studying a large aquatic mammal called a manatee. I was fascinated by the idea of going to the Amazon and working with manatees. I went with her, spent 6 months there. I met other people. One thing led to another. I ended up doing my master's and doctoral field research in the Amazon. I worked on communities of reptiles and amphibians. That's what I studied. But near the end of my field work for my PhD, I was phoned by World Wildlife Fund in Canada and asked if I would be a backup translator for an Indian chief coming up from the Amazon. And this was in the late 80s, and the Indian chief was a Kayapo Indian, one of many great Kayapo leaders very much in the tradition of Kayapo political leadership, very strong, well-organized leadership. And this leader, whose name was Payakan, was in Toronto, sponsored by some conservation NGOs to raise money, to raise funding for a protest that he wanted to organize, a protest of his people, the Kayapo, against a World Bank-funded, a proposed World Bank-funded hydro dam mega project on the Xingu River in the southeastern Amazon, where the Kayapo territories are, which was going to affect them quite drastically. Payakan returned to the Amazon, organized this protest with this funding that he obtained through the North American NGOs. He was able to transport of something like 500 Kayapo Indians to the site of this protest. The Kayapo are very colorful, beautiful, body paint and feathers, and very photogenic. They attracted a huge international press which attended this protest, and the subsequent international pressure was brought to bear on the World Bank, and they had to drop their loan. So it was very successful, and I became intrigued with the Kayapo. And I was invited by Payakan to visit his village. At the end of my PhD, I thought it would be an interesting thing to do. I visited the Kayapo, and I thought that the Kayapo were doing something remarkable for conservation of rainforest, because they were protecting a huge territory, their traditional territories, against deforestation, principally by ranching. And then they just had this huge success, environmental success, in stopping this dam, which was really unheard of. These Indians coming really from the middle of the forest, none of them literate, none of them even speaking most of them not even speaking the national language, in Brazil, Portuguese, and were able to beat out this mega project. So it all seemed very amazing and remarkable to me, and it seemed like something really good for conservation was happening here, and it would be an interesting opportunity to get involved and to do something. So that's how it started.
How did they beat the Brazilian establishment? I mean, that's a secret we all should learn. We could use that. How did they do it?
So they did it because they kind of the Kayapo have this really strong leadership and tradition of leadership and tradition of being organized, which stems from their history, their cultural history as a warrior nation. And this leadership, very proactive, always marched out, always left their territory to fight whatever was coming at them physically and politically, in both ways, militarily and politically, very proactive. And they began to understand the connection with the media of protests and staging actions and being dressed in their warrior tradition, and it's all part of their tradition. But they started to understand that it also garnered a lot of media attention, and that once they got media attention, they could get results. So that's really how they did it. They staged this very colorful and very impressive protest. It was all real. It wasn't faked in any way. It was all real in terms of their culture and what they felt. But it was also publicized by the international NGOs who had become involved as Kayapo supporters. There was a lot of international press there, and there was pressure. The World Bank was going to look really bad. And that's essentially what happened. And they dropped their loan. So they didn't really beat the Brazilian establishment as much as they caused embarrassment for the World Bank, I think, in that particular case.
How many Kayapos? I mean, I don't think many people in North America, and certainly in the United States, know anything unfortunately, about the Kayapos. How many Kayapos are there? Today,
there's probably about 6,000. They were more numerous. They were only contacted sort of extensively in the 1950s, and certainly there was a period probably prior to the 1950s where there was a decrease, a real decline in population with the introduction of European diseases. But they were kind of all contacted in the 1950s. They had been pushed back somewhat from the whole huge area that they roamed over in the southeastern Amazon, but they still occupied a big chunk of forest. And so their populations are definitely rebounding from that decline. The remarkable thing about the Kayapo has been their ability to have obtained in law official demarcation, official ratification of over 110,000 square kilometers of traditional territories. 110,000 square kilometers is the size, for example, of New Zealand, the whole country of New Zealand, in which are living 6,000 Kayapo. So it's very significant size for rainforest conservation. It's not just some little fragment. It's a multi-landscape scale sized area, and that the Kayapo fought for, and the Kayapo pressured the government, and the Kayapo obtained. And they didn't do this with really a lot of help from anybody else. This came from them. It was their struggle. They were the ones who were sort of on the front lines. They were the ones who marched to Brasilia and demanded the government respect their rights. They were the ones who took the hostages, and when there was a famous incident which in the 1980s when there was a gold rush on Kayapo lands, and one part of the Kayapo territory was invaded by several thousand gold miners, and it was too many for a small Kayapo community to deal with. So what they did was they closed down the gold miners' airstrips, took their equipment, kicked out some of them, kicked out a few thousand of them, and kept the rest of them hostage in there until the government dealt with them. force the government to deal with them. We'll only let these guys go when you give us our land. At that time, the government was offering, I think it was in the 1970s, the government was offering the Kayapo about 100,000 hectares of land. Today, they have over 11 million hectares of land, which is under Kayapo control. Nobody is allowed in Kayapo territory without authorization by the Kayapo. They have been very successful at protecting their borders, keeping their borders intact from the advancing wave of deforestation, which is advanced on them. It's up to their border now. It's starting to increasingly surrounding them. Agriculture, mostly ranching and logging. And this is why the conservation organizations, specifically the one I work for, Conservation International, realizes that there's such an unparalleled opportunity for conservation with the Kayapo, because they're been such strong defenders of their rights, their human indigenous rights and their land, which basically boils down to land rights, really. And they've been so strong.
Conservation International, in trying to protect, to preserve this Kayapo region, I suppose you'd call it, for environmental reasons, for humanitarian, what are all the reasons that Conservation International is doing what it's doing?
Well, certainly the primary mission, mandate of Conservation International is the preservation of biodiversity, animal and plant species. But we recognize that the preservation of biodiversity is intimately connected with the local people inhabiting these areas, and that the local people that are inhabiting these areas of forest that are so rich in animal and plant species are the ones that are ultimately responsible for protecting those areas. Therefore, Conservation International works with local peoples for the protection of the biological biodiversity, the forests in which people live, in the tropical forests. In this particular case, the Kayapo are rather an extraordinary example, I guess, of how Conservation International works with local people, because they are unique in the size of the area of tropical forest that they control. And when you look at why that is the case, you can trace it to Kayapo culture. That's why that forest is there. So anything we can do to promote survival of Kayapo culture and to empower the Kayapo to meet the challenges of the 21st century that are coming at them and the changes that are coming into their society is going to result in conservation of this forest.
I wonder how you can be able to pull that off. I mean, here you have 6,000 people on, well, a lot of land, and the land is protected, but it's such seduction for Native people, whether they're Native people in New Mexico or Native people in Alaska. I mean, to get the television or to get them, they're not going to have, what do they call those, snowmobiles,
Yeah.
of course. And you know what I'm saying? The way the cultures of these Native people end up to become so beyond the land and the landscape, becoming
yeah.
polluted. How are you going to pull that off with these just 6,000 people?
Well, because we believe that we can offer them something better than what, say, the loggers can offer them, or other influences that are ultimately destructive to both their society and their land can offer them in terms of, you're right, they're in the 21st century, they've been exposed to technology, there's a lot of things that they want that they can't just walk out in the forest and get like they used to before contact. They want metal tools, they want guns, they want ammunition, they want boats, they want fuel, radios, etc.
And televisions, I'd imagine.
They want
God help
televisions.
us.
That one's a little harder, though, because there's no electricity in there. But anyway, certainly, and we've seen it in the recent past, they're they are vulnerable to being bought off, I guess, in this specific case by loggers, because they've got rich timber stocks on their land. Outside Kaipo land, most of the forests are gone, so obviously the timber is in these forests that the Kaipo are protecting, and they're protecting these forests because it's their land. They're not protecting these forests because they're environmentalists in the sense that you and I are. They're protecting it because it's theirs, and their culture does not depend on raising cattle. Their culture depends on products that are produced by the forest. So they just don't cut down forest. It's not part of their culture, right? But having said that, you know, it's pretty black and white that they keep the ranchers out, because the ranchers come in, invade, take over their land, deforest, destroy it, and kick out the Indians. The loggers are a totally different story. The loggers just want to cut down some trees. We'll give them a whole bunch of cash, presents, whatever for it, and that's seductive. And they've had enough experience with some logging that went on in the 1990s, principally, logging for mahogany, high-value timber, to know something that they never knew before, which is, number one, a forest resource can be exhausted. I mean, that was not within any of their experience ever, that you could log out a whole species of tree, or kill a whole species of animal, or it wasn't within their experience. They saw that happen during mahogany logging. They saw there were impacts on their society is organized quite differently than ours. It's not, our society or Western society, the outside society, the ranching society is based on capitalist markets, accumulation of wealth and private property, and large scale in agriculture. Their society is based on the forest. There's no such thing as private property. I mean, in terms of land, it's all common. The forest is a common resource, and they'd never had any experience with money before, which means that everybody, no matter if they were chief or not chief, everybody had the same amount of stuff. Everybody had exactly the same opportunity. Anybody who wanted to go out and hunt could hunt. Anybody who wanted to go fish could fish. Anybody who needed a new feather headdress could go and get the feathers for it. Anybody who needed a new house could go get the timber and build themselves a new house, and so on. Very egalitarian society. And then when money came in, when the mahogany loggers started paying the Kaipo, and the Kaipo thought, oh great, we can get all this stuff. It's like party time. They just want to take out these mahogany trees. They didn't realize what they were getting into. There was disruption to their society with the introduction of money, disruption to leaderships, because the loggers just dealt with the leaderships, because the leaderships traditionally were the individuals who dealt with the outside world. Historically, it would have been in hunting tracks and in raids against other communities. Now it was dealing with loggers. Long and short of it is 10 years of mahogany logging. The Kaipo will now tell you today we've got nothing to show for it. We don't have any capacity. We have no training. We have no infrastructure. We have nothing. Just money just ran through our hands like water. Caused a whole lot of fighting among our communities because they started fighting over mahogany. It was a bad experience. So I think to get back to your original question is, with that experience under their belts, when the conservation organizations can come in and say, we can offer you something better. We can offer you, what we call sustainable economic development, based not on timber, but based on other resources that you have that you can harvest sustainably and ecologically and economically sustainably, that everybody in a community can have access to, which means it fits very well the principles of these more egalitarian principles of this society, right? Rather than just elites benefiting like happened during mahogany logging. This is how we combat this seduction into predatory resource exploitation, which, and from a conservation point of view, is principally the threat of logging, because that's the big resource that they have that the outside wants. when you can install or help a community implement a small scale, what we call conservation enterprise or economic alternative based on conservation, such as Brazil nuts or Brazil nut oil, which is something that is being implemented and that 3 villages have going. They don't make the same calculations that we make. Okay, how much money can we make from timber? What are our timber stocks? To them, everybody can access this. Because everybody can collect Brazil nuts. Everybody can help process the Brazil nut oil. Everybody can make benefit from it. It's benefiting everybody, and as a society, as a community, that they prefer than having just a few people benefiting. So if somebody from the community wants to go out and make a deal with the logger, the community itself, the community collective will not allow that because it will compromise the project, the economic alternative that is benefiting everybody in the community, which is quite different from our society based on private property. And so there's this control within the community. But you or the conservation organizations or the outside agencies has to be able to offer them, has to be able to help them realize these sustainable economic alternatives. And this is a big part of what we conservationists are trying to do in the area.
Just wondering, like, we talk about logging, we talk about rapaciousness and exploitation. I mean, these are the very negative aspects of modern society. But there's some positive aspects too. For example, medical care. Is that provided? I'm just curious. What about their educational system? And is there an opportunity for a Kayapo to go on to university and to? But if the Kayapo went on to university, it's the end of the. You know what I'm?
Yeah.
I mean, I
sure.
just wonder about those positive aspects and how they might impact on the Kayapos, or if they do not.
Certainly medical care with the introduction of European disease is absolute necessity now. And or access at least to the most basic Western medicine, vaccinations, antibiotics, principally, and anti-malarial. They didn't have malaria. They didn't even have malaria when I started working there in '92. That came in with the loggers. And of course, they didn't have TB and they didn't have diarrheal diseases and so on. The Brazilian government actually does a pretty darn good job of delivering the basic, the vaccinations, and each community, of which there's 15 Kayapo communities, which range in size from 150 people to 1,000 people. Actually, for Amerindian communities in the Amazon, they're quite large. They're considered large. The Brazilian government supports a health post in each one of those communities, which dispenses sort of the most basic life-saving medicine. And then they, in serious cases, will get evacuated by air to the nearest town. Education, it's what you said. If the Kayapo all start going to university, the area is lost. They've got to remain Kayapo. But of course, they're human beings. They're interacting with the outside world now, and they want education the same way we do, as empowerment. Which doesn't mean that they leave being Kayapo, because they don't. But they want to be able to read and write and understand math so they can understand the outside world. That's a bit harder, that's a bit trickier for them to access. There's some basic primary education provided by the state government in some of the villages, and depending on the leadership in the particular community, that will be better or less better, but very primary, sort of grade 1 to 5 type education. After that, there's really nothing. Some of the chiefs' sons were able to get more education on the outside during the years when Kayapo were making money off selling concessions for gold mining and selling mahogany. These days, that's harder. It's another area where, perhaps the outside world can help. Our program does involve some education, but it's more education having to do with territorial monitoring and surveillance, and also sustainable management of forest resources. It's not so much the basic reading and writing type education.
I think for the rest of the world, how could I put it, the key need here, I mean, the rainforests are the lungs of the planet. And here is a tribal group in the middle of Brazil that is preserving these lungs. I mean, for the rest of the world, what the Kayapo are doing is vital.
Yeah, it is vital, and we certainly, the Kayapo are protecting the largest, by far, the largest area, tract of rainforest that is under some form of protection, being an indigenous territory, in the whole world, by far. The largest national park in the tropics, in tropical forest, their lands are 3 times as big as the largest tropical rainforest park, which is also in Brazil. But we certainly view this as, us conservationists view the investment which is long term. It's not a project you go in and it's got a 5 or 10 year period, you close it, the job's done, you're out. We know this is going to be long term. We know this is going to take decades probably, because of the capacity building that has to happen for the Kayapo to be able to deal with all of these changes, very rapid changes. And we view that investment really as a payment for these extraordinary ecosystem services that the Kayapo are providing the world. As you mentioned, all the climatic properties of that forest, but also the fact that it is a large enough forest that it is going to conserve viable populations of many plant and animal species that otherwise would be wiped out. Because if the Kayapo territories weren't there, you can see this very clearly on the satellite shots, that forest would be gone. There's this seemingly inexorable advance of agriculture and ranching. It's unstoppable. As soon as there's a road, you see it spreading out and it all coalesces into one. And indigenous lands, the Kayapo being perhaps the most striking example of it, are considered to be, or observed to be, the most important barrier to, and perhaps the only real barrier to this deforestation, which is just doesn't seem like it's going to stop. It's just going to go through the Amazon.
These people surely have been, for millennia, stewards of the earth. Thank you so much, Dr. Barbara Zimmerman, for your work, for telling us this remarkable story. This has been Enviro Close-Up. I'm Carl Grossman. For a copy of this or any Enviro Close-Up, check out our website at www.envirovideo.com. And thank you for watching.